Okay, done.
You'll have to introduce yourself. I've never seen you without a moustache, so people may not recognize you.
Were you talking about me?
Yes.
Yes, can start.
No. Okay. Good morning and a very warm welcome to this Founding Fuel Masterclass on making sense of Xi Jinping's China. On behalf of the Founding Fuel, I very warmly welcome you to this session. Something tells me that we've got a lot of things right on this masterclass, not just the theme of the session, which is China, which has always been an enigma to all of us. We've got a great stellar panel with us, and I'll quickly introduce them very soon. We've also had time to do a proper build-up to this masterclass with a set of very interestingly curated pre-reads, an essay, a set of curated watch and read lists as well, to get you into the zone before you join us on this masterclass. And with the panel, we've been able to very sharply etch out some of the themes we want to discuss today. And I'll come to that, but great to see the response to this masterclass. There's so many of you who've kind of signed up for it, and I'm sure you'd have a very stimulating session. So I'll quickly kind of do a short introduction to the panel, one by one, starting with Mr. Gokhale. Mr. Gokhale, welcome to this masterclass.
Thank you.
Mr. Gokhale, of course, as you know, is our former foreign secretary and ambassador to China as well. He's also the author of a recent book on China, his third, and maybe the other panelists who have a book close to them can also hold it up. It's called After Tiananmen, The Rise of China. Yes, and it's published by HarperCollins. We carried an extract of the book yesterday on Founding Fuel. We published, maybe you might want to look it up. And the other two books are also equally interesting, The Long Game and so particularly The Long Game. So welcome, Mr. Gokhale. Mr. Gokhale is joining us from Pune, I should add. I'll now move to Professor Bo, if it's okay to call you Professor Bo. Professor, is really fantastic to have you join us all the way from Wellington in New Zealand. It's what, about around 7 o'clock in the evening, your time, I'm guessing. So thank you so much for joining. Professor Bo, as some of you might know, is a leading authority in Chinese elite politics, which is so relevant to the conversation today. He's also written a lot on his reading of China, and we're very fortunate to have him here on this panel. So welcome, Professor Bo.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'll come to Venkat. Professor Dr. Venkat Raman is a familiar name for Founding Fuel, the Founding Fuel community. Venkat's kind of kicked off this masterclass with a very interesting context-setting essay on Xi Jinping's China and why this month's Communist Party Congress was so critical. And I'm sure most of you would have had a chance to read it. But he's also written on China many number of times for us in Founding Fuel as well. So welcome, Venkat, and happy to have you join us from Indore.
Thank you, Vijay. Good morning to all.
Thanks.
Namaste from I'm Indore.
Terrific. And I come to Professor and Dr. Jabin Jacob, who joins us from his perch at the Shivner University, where he is an associate editor. Like Venkat, he's also a specialist in China studies and is a prolific writer, if I may add. I mean, you would have seen his byline quite often across publications, and that keeps us in the loop in terms of understanding China from an Indian lens. So welcome, Jim. You're on mute. Thanks.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Finally, I'd like to very warmly welcome Pramit Pal Chaudhary. Pramit is a dear friend and very kindly agreed to anchor this conversation. He's newly taken over, if I may add, as the India practice head for Eurasia Group, and he's also a visiting fellow at the Ananta Aspen Center, and he's been the former foreign editor of the Hindustan Times, if I may add. Pramit, welcome to this session. You're joining us from Delhi, right? You might want to just say hello. Yep. So before I hand it over to you, just a couple of housekeeping rules for the audience. Very simple. We'd like this conversation to be interactive. On the YouTube chat, we have our colleague and co-founder, Charles Assisi, managing that chat. So he will kind of keep this conversation going on chat as well. So feel free to share your comments and your questions. We'll take a few and kind of share it with Pramit and the panel to respond. So that's it. It's very simple. I will have some announcements to make right at the end, which will be relevant to this masterclass, but I'll come to that at the end of it. I will hand it over to Pramit, who will set context and take this conversation forward. So all the very best. Pramit, thank you.
Thank you, Indrajit. Let me begin by asking Ambassador Gokhale. The party congress is coming up. That's what everybody's got their eye on. And depending on what you read, it's either going to make him president for life or he's going to be facing problems. What do you think Xi Jinping wants to accomplish at the party congress? And how likely is he to succeed in accomplishing what he wants to do? And what are the implications for the rest of us?
Thank you, Pramit. It's a great privilege to be on this panel with you, Professor Poe, Dr. Jacob, and Dr. Venkatraman. And I want to thank Indrajit for inviting me. Pramit, there are to my mind, five important areas on which we need to focus in terms of what President Xi Jinping will try to accomplish in the party congress in October. First of all, I think he will try to augment his personalistic leadership through personnel changes. I'm not so much concerned as who will be in and who will be out, as much as I am focusing on to what extent those who are in will reduce his ability or check his authority in any way. Second, I think he is trying to enshrine himself as Marxism's interpreter-in-chief in the 21st century. This is something we have seen writings about in the Chinese media. And I think the objective in the Congress and post-Congress will be to amplify the party state's narrative in this regard. And just today, I have seen an article by President Xi Jinping, which is to be published in their flagship journal, Zhiyue, which is all about the historic mission of the Communist Party in the new era. So I think that very clearly will place him at the center of that activity. Thirdly, of course, I expect that he will build out the rule of law party state. In other words, he is trying to sanctify his actions with the force of law. And to that extent, making it difficult for successive governments or anybody else to question them, because they are not personal anymore, they're legal as per the law of the land. Fourthly, I think we have already seen a tendency on his part to prioritize the importance of detaching China in certain core sectors from dependence on foreign actors. And these core sectors, to my mind, are those already identified in Make in China 2025. Sectors like aerospace, IT, artificial intelligence and robotics, new materials, and so on. So I think to some extent, this process might be intensified. And lastly, there's no doubt in my mind that the party congress will strengthen the focus on making China, or the People's Republic of China, a national security state, which means we expect to see more defense modernization. I would expect a hardening of domestic supply chains to insulate them, at least in the core sectors, from the West. And I would see an enhancement of discourse power abroad. Now, whether he succeeds in this or not depends on so many factors. It depends on inner party politics. And frankly, very few of us really know what is going on inside the party. So we have to watch how the party congress unfolds. It also depends on the economic situation, and I hope that we can discuss that later because there are worrisome signs about the Chinese economy. And that being the case, although the intention to do many things might be there, they may lack the financial resources to do so. And the third, of course, is the extent to which the party state inhibits innovation and creative ideas. There is a tendency in under Xi Jinping's rule to do so. We need to see if that is carried forward. So perhaps I'll stop here, and I know that others have also been looking at this.
Professor Bo, I'll turn to you with more or less the same question. What do you think Xi wants to?
Thank you so much for this very good questions. And if you want a short answer, my answer is I don't know. But if you want long answers, I could tell you what I think. I will tell you my opinions about this two major issues. One is what is the Xi Jinping's goal for the party congress, and the second is how successful he could accomplish these goals. Before I present my own views, I'd like to provide a little kind of context about this forthcoming meeting of 20 Party Congress and another meeting, because China will have a leadership change in two major meetings. One is the October 16th, starting from October 16th, that's called the 20th Party Congress of the Chinese Communist Party. This will see the leadership change in the party. Then the party change will have implications for state leaders that will take place in March 2023. So these two meetings are actually one, but they are also separate. So if you look at Xi Jinping alone, he has four major titles. He is the General Secretary of the party. He's also Chairman of the Central Military Commission of the party. He also has two titles from the state. One is President of the People's Republic China, and the fourth one is the Chairman of the Central Military Commission of the People's Republic China. There are two positions in the military. They are theoretically is held by one person, but in practice can be held by two different individuals. Because if you somehow this year at the party congress decide to have a different individual to be CMC, chairman of the party, then you have a split between these two positions. That is, the person A will be party's CMC chairman, and person B, which is Xi Jinping, will be PRC's CMC chairman. So that'll be very, very interesting. So I think the critical issue now is, if you look at the timeline, we tend to assume somehow the leadership has been decided already, because it's not up to the 7th plenum of the 19th Party Congress, the 19th Central Committee, to decide who will be the next top leader, General Secretary of the party. Or it's not up to the Party Congress per se, 2,296 deputies. They are, in a way, rubber stamp. So in theory, we should have a candidate already who would just go through the motion of being elected in 2 weeks. But my hunch is that that is not decided yet. Because if you follow China very, very closely, you'll find different signs of power, up and down. From today's, actually, a video from today, actually, it's yesterday, the 73rd anniversary of the founding of People's Republic China. There's a dinner party Premier Li Keqiang give a talk. If you read Premier Li Keqiang's talk, you will get a sense that nobody has been decided for the top job. So Xi Jinping's goal, I think there will be in two different categories. In one category is to try to amend the CCP constitution for two different purposes. Number one, he wants to install his recognition. It's called two establishments. That was adopted by the sixth plenum of the 19th Central Committee in October 2021. The point was that they want to establish Xi Jinping as a core of the Central Committee and the core of the entire party, and establish Xi Jinping's thought as a guide for the party and for the whole country. So Xi Jinping has been promoting his own so-called two establishments since November 2021. But this critical reference marker is absent from Premier Li Keqiang's talk. So this is one goal Xi Jinping wants to promote in terms of revision of the CCP constitution. The second one is to create a new position as a party chairman, because Xi Jinping is faced of major hurdles of two major norms. One is called age limit. In the past 20 years, the top leadership has followed a rule of age 68 as a retirement age. Xi Jinping was born on June 15th, 1953. So he turned 68 on June 15th, 2021, last year. So he is now 69. Nobody has been able to stay beyond age 68. Last time, 5 years ago, Vice President Wang Qishan turned 69. He had to retire, then came back as Vice President of China without a membership of the Politburo. So this is a major hurdle for Xi Jinping. The second hurdle is term limit. Actually, according to a regulation on the term limit adopted by CCP in 2006, Article 6 made it very clear nobody should stay beyond 2 consecutive terms. So age limit, in my view, is sufficient condition, and term limits are necessary conditions. So in that sense, for anybody who has reached 68 and beyond should retire. But now you have combination of age limit and term limit. So Xi will have to retire. So in order to get around that, he wants to create a new position. That is, he's served 2 terms as a general secretary of the party. Now he's going to start a new term as a chairman of the party. So this is one of his goals in terms of changing his positions. Once he is able to secure his own position, he may be able to be in a position to secure positions for his followers. There'll be a long list.
So you don't see him having any problems with this, but you said you have a hunch that he's going to face some problems, and you cited Li Keqiang's speech. So do you see him having at least some signs of dissent? Do you actually see him having a real problem?
Yeah.
Through?
Oh, yeah. A lot.
A lot.
Let me just give you one clue. On 21st September 21st, the top military leadership had a major conference. It's a gathering of all major leaders from national level, the theater level, all different forces, and so on and so forth. If you see the picture, it's a large gathering. So it was the meeting of the Central Military Commission without Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping has been the chairman of the Central Military Commission for 10 years. But for such a critical meeting, because at this meeting, what they are doing was to review 10 years, the so-called achievements of past 10 years, and to project their future, what they're going to do next. For such a meeting, if somehow Xi Jinping is not available, this meeting should wait. They can wait for a week or even two until the commander-in-chief is available. If he's not available in person, he can participate through virtually, but he is absent. His only presence was his so-called instructions, but nobody knows who has written this kind of instructions. This is only one signal. The second most important signal is that as a result of this conference held on September 21st, on 23rd, the People's Liberation Daily published a major article reviewing the past 10 years, the military achievements, so on and so forth. This article, if you compare to another article published by Xinhua News Agency on July 31st, you'll find huge differences. Because over the 10 years period, Xi Jinping has developed a series of reference markers for himself. The first one is so-called Xi Jinping thought on strengthening the military. That thought, Xi Jinping is a thoughtful leader. He has a lot of thoughts. So this is one very important for the military. So this thought was written into the CCP Constitution. So it's very significant because it's part of CCP Constitution. But that reference mark has been deleted from this article published by People's Liberation Daily. The second one is considered another major achievement by Xi Jinping himself, is so-called the responsibility system of the CMC chairman. 军委主席负责制 in Chinese. This is very important. Actually, he has introduced a lot of documents to support, to institutionalize, to make a kind of a law-like, rule of law. To establish his authority, absolute authority over the military. Because I'm a chairman, you have to listen to me. Nobody else counts. But that reference mark has been deleted from this article. There's also reference to, listen to Chairman Xi, follow Chairman Xi, defend Chairman Xi, all this, all this kind of statements have been completely erased from this article. This is a major, because he is still the CMC chairman, but his reference marks have disappeared. That is published in both People's Daily and People's Liberation Daily.
So this
is a collective decision made by Central Military Commission without Xi Jinping. This is a major.
So I'll just turn on Mr. Gokhale. What do you think, what kind of signs should we be looking for in the party Congress regarding how strong or how coherent is the support for Xi? And as you mentioned, let's talk also, I would like to talk a little about the economy. The driving force of the Chinese economy over the past couple of decades has been the private sector. Now you've seen Xi almost go back to Maoist concepts of economic thinking, where the state not only controls everything, is actually taking out, if you wish, a lot of the big private sector companies, Tencent, Alibaba, and so on and so forth. Where is all of this going, and what should we be looking for?
Sure. Thanks, Pramit. I listened with great interest to what Professor Po said. I just want to make a couple of short comments, after which I'll come to the economic issue, and I'll keep it brief because there are two other panelists who are quite qualified to also speak on that subject. I have two very brief comments to what Professor Po said. One, I tend to agree with him that they may be exploring the position of chairman of the party, and that cannot be ruled out. But my gut sense is that that is only a change in nomenclature and may not necessarily indicate any diminution of authority or power. My second point is non-appearance of leaders close to the party Congress has been, it is not exceptional that Xi Jinping has been absent. Sometimes leaders find it convenient to absent themselves when there is still a decision to be finalized. And we have seen this with Mao, with Deng during the Tiananmen incident, for instance, as well as with Xi now. So I think we have to be cautious about that. On the economy, Pramit, very briefly, we have to go back to the period before Xi Jinping. And I have dealt with this extensively in the new book. The enormous reforms that took place as a result to which the economy grew from $500 billion to $7 or $8 trillion by 2012 also led to large problems and challenges for the party. The private sector emerged and weakened the control of the party on the economy. Gross corruption began to manifest itself, and there was a widening income disparity as well as a developmental disparity between the East Coast and the rest of China. And therefore, for Xi Jinping, when he came to office, the priority changed. Simply growing the GDP by 6 to 7% a year was not the priority anymore. It was quality of life issues. It was reduction of the socio-economic disparities that had emerged. So what we saw, at least in the initial years, was Xi Jinping shifting the policy focus from export-led industrialization, which is what was responsible for China's spectacular growth, to technology and innovation, as well as to increasing domestic consumption and equalizing society, which is encapsulated in his famous phrases, dual circulation and common prosperity. These were key words. Now, overall, these are very laudable objectives. My sense and my view is that there has been flawed implementation. Today, the kind of oversight that the government has on the private sector, including the revival of party units within the private sector, including foreign-owned enterprises, is stifling innovation. After all, if you have the party unit saying that we need you to develop this technology or we need you to invest in that particular material, it stifles technology and innovation. Secondly, as far as foreign direct investment is concerned, aside from the regulatory problems which were already there, you have this increasing sense that the investment may no longer be viable because China's predictable regulatory framework is rapidly changing. And finally, you have the anti-corruption campaign. This is spreading fear, both among the domestic investors as well as the foreign investors. So as I see it, a lot of the policy may be well-intended, but I think the implementation by the party state is deeply flawed. And the key concerns to my mind are the slowing economic growth, irrespective of what China says. The IMF now puts the growth this year at less than 3%, and this is likely for next year as well. There is no doubt there is rising unemployment, particularly youth unemployment. Now, you also have the double whammy of high savings rate, which is not ideal during a recessionary phase, and capital flight, money leaving China for abroad. Both are problems which don't help in dual circulation in domestic consumption. And finally, we can't ignore the housing market, real estate crisis. To my sense, the economy is key to deciding how much of the agenda the party and presumably Xi Jinping as the leader of the party will fulfill going forward.
Great. Let me then turn this now to two other panelists. Let me begin with Professor Venkatraman. And any of the elements that have been mentioned here that you'd like to talk about, please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Prabhu. I think, again, talking from where we started, this 20th Party Congress is extremely critical because China is today at an inflection point. I don't have the data, because what happens inside that black box, very few of us, but whatever little I have followed, Chinese politics, I feel that, Xi Jinping taking charge and having tremendous amount of hesitation to pass on the mantle to sixth generation is actually lack of confidence in the party itself, that how the sixth generation is going to handle the contradictions which have come about as a result of the economic modernization drive. When Hu Jintao, let me take you to 2002, when Hu Jintao took over from Tiananmen, the party suddenly felt that two of its most important constituencies, the working class and the agricultural class, the peasantry, except these two, everyone else has benefited from the economic modernization. Now, so he came up with this harmonious society approach. And then comes Xi Jinping. And what we need to see for the 20th Party Congress is what kind of work report he is submitting. So therefore, many people forget that when Hu Jintao was about to leave his office, in the 18th Party Congress report, it was very clearly mentioned that two of the most important agendas in the next regime under Xi is going to be anti-corruption and the environmental issue. Now, Xi Jinping comes and he sees within this, because of the the national champions, the big players, private players like Alibaba and Tencent, I think the economic modernization drive has actually gone few notches up. And the kind of socio-economic stratification that China has seen has become extremely complex. So the point is, does Xi Jinping have this kind of a confidence that whoever comes next, that person will be able to handle this? Perhaps the answer is no. And that is why he wants to the best of his ability, bring in those kind of institutional mechanisms within the party to have a smooth transition process to the sixth generation. Now, we all know, many of us know that who have been following Chinese politics, that Xi Jinping, right from the time, after the Cultural Revolution happened, he has been somewhat of a conservative person who has always been very, very close to what the party stands for. But at the same time, he has been a very major, pragmatist. So therefore, how does he combine, this kind of a pragmatism and conservative approach? I think that is where Xi is challenged. And he is having this kind of a hesitation to, pass on the mantle. And as these socio-economic stratification complexities are becoming more and more difficult for the party to handle, I think what the scope for ad hocism in the way the Chinese economic reforms are handled is also getting reduced a bit, leading to more and more contradictions. So what do you do? So therefore, the first thing is basically to, take control. And if you look at Chinese history, these phases of centralization, decentralization, re-centralization has always been a part of Chinese political culture. So another thing which I want to know, I want to highlight here is that the amendment which people speak about in the 19th Party Congress, people say that he is out there to completely head the Communist Party till eternity. That is not right. And so people question, why is he doing so? What he has actually done is he has brought amendment to the party constitution by having a provision for the third term as chairman of People's Republic of China, president of People's Republic of China, which till now has been, significantly a titular position. More important thing has been the general secretary position. So therefore, there are talks that, why does he want to retain this kind of a titular position as a result of that amendment? So coming back to, where the work, I think 20th Party Congress, we need to look at this work report, what kind of work report we are going to have, what Xi Jinping is going to present. And it gives us a blueprint and it gives us a roadmap that what is it that, who are the people who are going to man the topmost decision-making party, bodies? How are these, bodies going to be manned by people, certain experts or generalists, where they are going? That is where, we need to understand. There is also a certain debate within the party that is Xi out there to actually leave a legacy? And if we are talking about that legacy, then, is he interested in having a tech superpower China, which is out there under any circumstances, by hook or by crook, become #1 player in 2049? And by using that as a facade, I can actually perpetuate my power because he is not going to be there till 2049. So I will have the most, advanced specialists from aerospace industry, from the robotics industry, from the energy industry, from the fintech industry, to enhance the boom and make China #1. But there are other people, especially the Youth League faction, which has always been, more pro-people kind of an approach, pro-agriculture, pro-common man. So therefore, they are saying that we need to have technology to improve the overall living standards of the people. So how do we basically balance this so-called China dream? How do we use technology? How we harness technology? How we modernize our society? That itself seems to be a major point of contention. For example, and this is the last, thing which I'm going to say before I pass it on to you to have Jabin's views on this. So 5-6 months back, when China was, having COVID, and even before that, when China recovered from COVID, the first phase, Li Keqiang went to some of the other cities in China. And, when he saw that, we need to kickstart, things in the economy. So he was all in favor of, starting nightlife, having hawkers and all that. But when he came to Beijing, and he wanted to basically speak about it, people who are more close to Xi Jinping, his people said that, no, we have, tried our best to modernize China. We can't go back. We need to have beautiful cities. So the very concept of what is modernization, what a modern China should look like, what is the role of common man, what is the agenda of the party? I think all these things are basically now fiercely being debated, within the top echelons of the party. And these debates are manifesting themselves in different ways. And that amounts to, what do you do with a tech China? How do you handle the economy? How do you handle, the debt issue? How do you handle the real estate? How do you handle people who are, paying the EMIs, but they are yet to get the possession of the houses? There are already a lot of demonstrations in various banks, by people who are saying that we are not going to. So how does Chinese leadership manage all these contradictions? I think 20th Party Congress, the new leadership, the work report, these are going to give us enough of clues as to what's the way forward. I'll stop here.
So I turn to you, Jabin. The words were good word for you. What are you expecting for the Party Congress? And there's a whole set of issues that have been raised by the other speakers. Perhaps you'd like to comment on some of those.
Yeah, thank you, Pramit. Mine's a tough job. We've already had a very rich discussion. And what I'll do is to try and maybe stitch together some organizing principles, that probably bring together all these points. I think number one, I think, we have to remember that this is a party state, right? People tend to forget the party element of China quite often in their analyses and discussions, especially of Chinese foreign policy. So, I mean, when we think of it as a party state, and now we are, of course, talking about the 20th Party Congress, I think the way we are going to look at this entire range of issues will be quite different. I mean, this is not a normal state from the perspective that we have in our democracies, not a normal state in international politics. Because if there's one thing that the party is pro, it is pro itself. It is regime survival that is at the base of everything that the party does and directs others to do. So if we keep that in mind, I think a lot of these contradictions, a lot of these power plays, they all begin to make sense. This is about survival of the party, first and foremost, and national interest of the PRC or the people's interest. All of these are secondary interests. And what we've been seeing in the last decade, and perhaps a little more, are a bunch of things. One, of course, personality matters. But I'm again on the side of Ambassador Gokhale here, in the sense that while Xi Jinping is sort of out to promote his own personal leadership, it also needs to be understood that there is a certain element of, and this is something I think Venkat also pointed out, that there's a certain element of, there's a broad support base also that Xi Jinping has. He's not able to do all of this without that support base. I mean, we, of course, naturally have a tendency to view things on the basis of what we are seeing. So we see anti-corruption drive, and the implication is there's a lot of opposition to Xi Jinping. But the reverse is also true, that he's able to conduct these anti-corruption drives, that he's able to conduct a meeting of the military without his own presence, precisely because he's all-powerful and he's confident in his ability to stay in power. Xi Jinping would not have taken the risk of going to, the risk, quote unquote, of going to Samarkand for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization if his position was in any way weak or unsure. This close to the party Congress, I think that's a sign of confidence that he's signaling both internally as well as externally. So, I think there's a limit to which we can take the personality argument. This is actually a whole system that is working, at least a system of the party that is working in with some degree of coherence and concert. Second, there is an increasing fusion of the party and the state within China. And I think this is important to note, because this has implications for how China's economy will run, Chinese foreign policy will run, and how the rest of the world must look at this. My colleague Bhim Subba at the Hyderabad Central University and I have guest edited the special issue for the China Report Journal on the 100 years, two special issues, in fact, on 100 years of the Communist Party of China. Let's not forget the 20th Party Congress is important, but there were certain important markers that the Chinese Communist Party put out on the occasion of its anniversary last year, the 100th anniversary last year. So one of the things that we sort of highlighted is the party-state fusion, how state institutions are collapsing into party institutions, how the party is becoming, the party leads everything, right? This is a return of the Mao Zedong slogan, East, West, South, North, Center, the party leads everything, all institutions. Another important point, and this is something, again, that people tend to miss, is that Xi Jinping's Marxism, he's a dedicated Marxist-Leninist, but he's also marrying Chinese conceptions of Marxism-Leninism with a very particular view of Chinese history, a sense of exceptionalism, as it were. So we have a new animal out here of communism from China that is married to a very strong sense of self, a very strong hyper-nationalism of China, as it were. And therefore, you have the Communist Party, the Chinese party state, acting in strange ways. I mean, why else would you have Wolf warrior diplomacy? I mean, Ambassador Gokhale, Mr. Gokhale is sitting here. Which diplomat acts in a way that brings, problems or shame to his country or sullies the reputation of the country? But Chinese diplomats are able to do that because it's not so much the reputation of China as much as they're standing with their bosses, the survival and the reputation of the Communist Party of China that matters in international politics. Finally, and I'll stop with this, is that all of this means that for the international community, the Chinese view of the world is zero-sum. If liberal democracies survive or thrive outside of China's borders, that is seen as an implicit threat to the survival and the status and the standing of the Communist Party at home. So while we look at the economic problems in China and so on, we must also keep an eye on exactly what China is doing with policies such as Made in China 2025. Why does China want to decouple from the rest of the world? Why does it want to turn inwards and protect itself from the outside world if it did not perceive a sense of threat from the outside world, right? So together, I think all of these factors mean that the more problems there are in China, the more internal strengthening the Communist Party will aim to do, and the more aggressive and the more problematic the Chinese Communist Party will see whatever else is happening outside of its borders. So Chinese foreign policy, as they say, is, I mean, all foreign policy is domestic. And I think the Chinese are a classic case of this. Let me stop there.
We turn back to Professor Bo. Incidentally, for everybody who's listening in, if you have questions, please put them on the chat for the YouTube live stream, and they are going to be passed on to me, or Indrajit will read them out to me later, and we will pose them to the panel. So please, the chat on the YouTube live stream. Professor Bo, a couple of you had a question. I mean, everybody's obviously had a slightly different opinion. There have been a variety of opinions of what we can expect from the party Congress, and you may want to address those. But would you like to also talk, and I think we'll now move a little on since Javin's now taken us onto that path. What exactly will we expect from China on the international stage after the party Congress?
That's a very good question. Let me go back to this history, the economy a little bit. I want to, highlight this, the kind of historical background of this current policy. We all know that in the past 40 plus years, China has conducted so-called three waves, three openings to the outside world. And the first one is the late 1970s, was the first opening. And it was basically the special economic zones, in 4 special economic zones, 3 in Guangdong, 1 in Fujian. So for the first 10 years, this first opening, the economic growth on average was 9.5%. And then the second wave, because of the Tiananmen incident in 1989, China lost direction. Jiang Zemin was in Beijing, but he had no idea where to go. So Deng Xiaoping decided to have a southern tour in early 1992. That was the start of the second wave of opening to the outside world. So this whole decade was like the average growth was 10.2%. Then you have the third opening, which is starting with China's entry into WTO in 2001. So this whole decade of, Hu Jintao, Wen Jiabao was booming. So they called it hyper growth, is 10.6%. Of course, with the years of the growth, as the ambassador mentioned, with years of the growth, so you have a lot of internal problems in terms of economic misallocation, kind of so on and so forth. So there should be a kind of a period of consolidation and adjustment. So then we enter the fourth decade of Xi Jinping. But if you look at what Xi Jinping has been trying to do, first term, 5 years, there was not much kind of new policies in terms of economic front. Basically, he was focused on two things. One is the anti-corruption, to establish his own authority over the party and the military. Second one was the military reform. So basically, he kind of transformed the military in his own favor. Of course, military is kind of complete changed from the old system to a new one. Then his second term start to contemplating this economic front. He wanted to introduce his own policies, as I think Ambassador mentioned very clearly, two major agendas. One is the social inequality. So this is called a common prosperity, or whatever it terms. The second one is the environmental concerns. So how are you going to clean up the environment so you can do better? Long story short, his policies were kind of because of its problems, inherent problems of the 2021 last year. Because he wanted to establish kind of rule of law over private sector, trying to clean up the environment, trying to correct this social imbalance. But as a result, China was suffering power shortages, and when you have this so-called common prosperity, then you try to squeeze the rich people and entrepreneurs out of their positions, and also the compromise. Their companies are losing huge on the stock market. So in December 2021, at a major conference, economic financial conference, Xi Jinping's policies were rejected one by one by the conference, by the top leadership. So because that policy is not sustainable for the current situation of China. So that's why Li Keqiang's policy, Premier Li Keqiang's policy, became a mainstream since December 2021. However, there is a tag of war between Li Keqiang and Xi Jinping over the discourse of the economic orientations. So then you can hear two different voices of China. When you read very, very clearly, they are loud, different voices in China. One is for economic reform and opening. One is against, but they don't say we oppose reform and opening, but they're trying to keep the voice down. They try to use different terms, kind of a red blood, kind of a tradition, kind of a Chinese red color, what they call the tradition, or the people-centered economy. So now they have a new term called a people economy versus market economy. So they're going to promote so-called people economy over market economy because they pretend that somehow they are working for the people. So people should be in the center. But now there's a debate, academic debate. Some scholar from North Korea saying, I'm the first author of this idea of people economy, not a scholar from China, the professor from People's University of China. So there's a side debate. But the point is that majority of Chinese people and Chinese elites, they are beneficiaries of this reform and opening. Give you one simple example. Majority, probably 100% almost, maybe 95% people send their children to US, UK. 0% send their children to Russia. Why? Because China has become part of the global village. And they recognize the value of the Western countries, such as US and the UK. They want their children to have a better future than theirs. So they stay in China to make money, so their children can enjoy their life in the US. So this kind of connection between China's globalization and China's kind of a domestic audience. But Xi Jinping is promoting something else. This is actually a long story. He started a new academy called Chinese Academy of History in 2019. This is a high rank, almost like a minister, full minister level rank academy, the same level as Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. In recent days, scholars from this academy have produced a number of papers to provide options for Xi Jinping's move backwards. One option is to move back to Mao's era of class struggles. In one paper, they're saying they are trying to dismiss the criticism of a class struggle theme. You know, Mao was promoting class struggle. And Deng Xiaoping said, no, there's no class struggle. We don't have classes anymore. They're all people, citizens of People's Republic of China. But this group of scholars from the Chinese Academy of History are promoting this theme as for China, for the future, not for the past. The second option is to go back to Ming-Qing period, Ming Dynasty, Qing Dynasty. During that period of time, China was isolated. And they were saying it was not a passive being isolated. China, Ming-Qing authorities set up barriers to prevent invasion from imperialist countries. It's a proactive, it's a good thing. So this is their advice, not moving forward, going back to Ming-Qing period. Another one, former president of Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Wang Weiguang, whose name, he wrote an article saying we should correctly understand Stalin to celebrate the 70th anniversary of Stalin's death. Stalin passed away in March 5th, 1953, the day Xi Jinping was born, the year Xi Jinping was born. They are basically suggesting that we should go back to Stalinism. To move forward. This is the future of China. If Xi Jinping is going to be in charge. Talking about why Xi Jinping is taking a turn over the private sector. It's very simple. If you want to promote the economy, you have to allow private sector to flourish. And so there will be trickle down and the whole people will be richer. But if you look at the whole thing from the point of politics, when people are getting richer, they want to have a more voice in politics. They will be a part of, would like to participate in politics. They want to select their own agency or actually to be elected themselves. This is a potential challenge to the party and to Xi Jinping's authority. It will be much easier if these people are not rich, because if you have money, they want to have a power. They have economic resources, they want to have a political influence. So it's easier the other way around.
That almost sounds like Gang of Four economics. But I'll turn to Mr. Gokhale and ask him that other question. How do you see the party Congress influencing Chinese foreign policy, or its view of the world, if you wish, or Xi Jinping's view of the world?
Yeah, thank you, Pramit. I think the basic premise from which I begin my analysis is the surfacing of the view that the United States represents an existential threat to both the party and the state. Now, this is not a new view. It has prevailed for most of the time that the People's Republic of China has existed, although it went subterranean in the time of Deng and his successors because they needed American capital and talent and technology. But if you look at the last 3 to 4 years, this critical thread of Chinese foreign policy and national security policy has once again gained centrality. Now, if you agree with this broad assessment, then I think there are some important implications going forward after October 2022. I think economically and technologically, we will continue to see a decoupling of the Chinese economy in critical sectors. There is no question of an $18 trillion economy completely decoupling from the world. I don't think that is either possible or, from Xi Jinping's view, desirable. But certainly in the critical sectors, they would like to build their own technology. And this means some amount of supply chain disruption is likely to occur. It also means that the rest of the world might be forced into uncomfortable choices where key technologies are concerned, because either we align with the Western technology regime or the Chinese one. And as Indians, we have to be prepared for this. Secondly, on the military side, there will be no, and the foreign policy side, there will be no let-up in their assertive and, might I dare say, combative approach, posture and action. In fact, as the economy grows, as they gain in confidence, they are going to be assertive about their interests. And what we should expect is a strong push to align the rest of the world against the West. I truly believe that a battle of hearts and minds has begun. A battle for hearts and minds has begun. And this again impacts us diplomatically and strategically. So far as peripheral and proximate states are concerned, and I think India falls very much in that category, I think we become more vulnerable to Chinese pressure, whether it is low-level military coercion or non-military coercion, for purposes of Chinese homeland security. We know that after 2013, on the basis of their own military writings, their security perimeter has shifted from the homeland to what the Russians like to call the near abroad. And India falls within that near abroad. So crudely put, we are looking at ourselves now as a battleground of sorts if there is a Sino-US conflict or Sino-US tension going forward. And finally, for India specifically, I would say that because we too are an expanding economy with an expanding diplomatic and national security capability and influence, there is the increasing overlap of our strategic periphery with the Chinese strategic periphery, especially as they move into the Indian Ocean region. And this means an enhanced diplomatic and defense cost for the government of India. There are a whole lot of other implications, but I would really sort of highlight these, Prof.
Thank you. Let me turn now to Venkataraman. Where do you see India? What should India be watching out for or being careful about after the Party Congress?
Yeah, I think what India should be, watching out for is, how do we deal with China? I mean, in terms of at a bilateral level. And so, for example, just to give you an example, something which Jebin said, everything that happens on the foreign policy front is an extension of what happens in the domestic sphere. So, as the party has become more prominent, and has become, party has become extremely important for Xi Jinping, it's a party state. So, of late, there are also high level of diplomacy that the party is having to establish what it's called, quote unquote, a global network of political parties. So the party, it's certain kind of party, it's not state diplomacy, it is party diplomacy, which has become very, very critical. So the Chinese Communist Party has reached out to Southeast Asian countries and engaged the political parties there at a very highest of levels, trying to entice them to different kinds of benefits that will accrue to them. How they are going to get into this whole network of BRI and other kinds of engagements which China is looking for. Now, when India is dealing with China, how are we going to deal with this? Are we going to deal with, the Chinese state? Are we going to deal with the Chinese party? And are we going to deal with the Chinese party state? I think there seems to be some bit of a confusion as far as how do we treat, China. As and when so for example, when Wang Yi came to India, suddenly, I think, we gave him a cold shoulder, perhaps rightly so. You can say many things, but the point is that what after that? Can we afford to completely isolate China and look the other way, given the kind of interconnectedness that the world is having? I keep on asking people, can we, for example, choose, to continue to import and have our dependence on APIs from China, and at the same time continue to have a very toughened stance as far as our bilateral trade and commerce engagement is concerned, saying that unless the boundary dispute is solved, we are not going to move. We have been the people who have been trying to have a larger approach and have been telling the Chinese that let's have people to people, track two diplomacy, so that perhaps there will be spillover effects on track one. And the Chinese were trying to play that boundary card. And today, they are trying to discourse us and trying to tell us that, let's try to engage on all fronts. We are saying nothing doing, boundary, let's solve the boundary dispute first. So I think as Xi Jinping becomes more powerful, or, the way he is located, to what extent your party is calling shots, how does party's vulnerability, is exploited by the party elite to politically mobilize the Chinese people on nationalistic lines? That is something which is going to be very, so for example, warrior diplomacy. So every time, China has been in trouble on any other front, the Chinese leadership has resorted to, encouraging anti-Japanese protests to mobilize nationalism. So is the case with Taiwan. And so again, if as Mr. Gokhale has said, this near abroad, how will India, become a part of this near abroad narrative and will become a source of, political mobilization by the party elite? And how do we then deal with it? I think that is something which is very, very critical. And last, we may say that, we are not going to deal with China. We are not going to economically, engage China, or we'll be very selective about it. That's fine. But the point is, what are the other options? So are we going to have, more costly options of getting things from, the rest of the world? And then the rest of the world subcontracts it back to China. And then we again, have the. So therefore, it's a very, it's a bit of truth that, it's difficult to completely isolate ourselves from China. And I think it's going to be a very, very challenging task for us, that how do we, protect our national interests and at the same time, be smart enough to pick our battles, with China. That is something which is very critical.
I fully agree. So we'll have for this round, we'll end with, before we turn to questions, we'll have a Jacobin response.
So quickly, Pramit, I think China has already been pretty active in India's neighborhood. We've seen the Chinese do two things. One, they've tried to come around India, integrate India's neighbors much more closely economically with the Chinese economy. Now, this has been going on for a very long time. I think the novelty really in Xi Jinping's tenure has been the intention to politically integrate these countries around us with China. So where in the past we only worried about China-Pakistan relations, today we have to worry about Chinese presence in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, of course, as well as in Nepal. Where China was not at all a player or active much, say, about 20 years ago in Nepalese politics, today we have factions that are pro-Chinese or the Chinese actively involved in a ruling party in Nepal. So, I mean, it should, at least within India, it should give us cause to think about exactly how we let this situation come to pass. There is, of course, the benefit of huge economic resources and capacity that the Chinese have, the ability to convert economic influence into political influence. But there are also structural problems, I think, in the way that we approach our neighborhood. That is a problem. Today, the Chinese are talking about building a railway line to Kathmandu. We've been talking decades about building railway lines into Nepal, with the terrain so much easier on our side. And yet the Chinese are now taking taking the lead in this matter. Second, I think the Party Congress, the 20th Party Congress is just one indicator, but I think the indication has been around for a very long time that the Chinese now increasingly view India as simply an appendage or a subservient to the United States or to the West. For the Chinese system, the Communist Party, it's easier to look at things in black and white as a direct confrontation between China and the United States. And so those who are not with China are essentially, on the American side. And I think that poses challenges to us because it makes it difficult for us to deal with the Chinese when they have this particular approach of not giving us agency, which then, and also because the Chinese have been able to have ingress into South Asia over the last decade or so and more, and in a deep ingress. So I think here is where the challenge for us lies. How do we reorder our neighborhood relations? How do we actually bring to fruition what the Prime Minister calls neighborhood first? Third, I think, is on the military side. I expect the boundary dispute to continue on the boiling. We might have these temporary agreements to pull back from certain points of friction, but points of friction are only likely to increase because that is the nature of the beast as far as the Chinese political system is concerned. They need to show the kettle on the boil in order to legitimate and to bring the Chinese people to believe that the Communist Party is absolutely necessary for China's survival, China's growth, China's development. So that's the kind of attitude that they have. Fourth, there's going to be a temptation in India to go the Chinese way, to achieve the kind of achievements that the Chinese have done by following the Chinese model. And I think that would really be a big problem for India, because then India is going from a potential alternative to not just China and the United States, but to simply being a has-been or a minor player in the battle between the United States and China. I think that really, the politics of this is also something that Indians need to think about very, very deeply. Let me stop there.
So, Indrajit, please
Yes.
go ahead.
Pramit, the conversation was terrific. I was listening to every word, but I think there are quite a few very interesting questions. I'll try and cluster them so that at least it gives us. So the first one is really around the whole issue around military and geopolitics, right? And there are two questions there. Manish Pajan is asking about whether there is an alignment between Xi and the rest of the party leadership on their views on China's military and geopolitical role. That's one. I think Manas Rath has asked about what are the global imperatives that are influencing Xi, and can China, and I think Mr. Gokhale addressed this partly, can China continue its rise peacefully without facing up to the US? Does India really matter in this equation, and how do these affect actions towards business? So maybe that's something that you might choose to kind of take on for discussion. There are a few others, so if he can keep it tight, then we'll be able to pack in some more questions. And we might, Pramit, you're on mute.
Yeah, so in fact, I suspicion that we have, since we have 4 panelists and 2 relatively large questions,
Yeah.
We can probably treat this as our concluding round on the end of the masterclass before we turn to the audience reflections. So all of you have heard the two broad questions that have been raised. So as briefly as possible, I could like each of you to handle that. So let's start with Professor Bo.
Well, I think this is a good question. My take is, I think we are a little bit too absolute about China's regime. We're not. We are. I think Chinese, leaders, different leaders have different policies, different policy orientations. Under Deng Xiaoping and even Jiang Zemin, Hu Jintao, I think they played right international game, choosing right partners and doing right things. But under Xi Jinping, they played a wrong game and choosing wrong enemies. Let me explain. In terms of Xi Jinping, China's strength is in the economy. China is the largest exporter and largest foreign trader in the world. It had, I think more than 140 plus countries claim China as the #1 trading partner. So in my view, the right game for China to play is to play trade game, economic game, not to play economic game, military game. That's not China's strength. And now China is gradually, going to play more military game than economic game. I think that's a wrong game to play. Secondly, China has chosen, Xi Jinping personally has chosen a wrong enemy to deal with. China does not have to have U.S. as enemy to deal with. There are kind of 2 different historical narratives throughout Chinese history. The most popular narrative among Chinese is that the Russia historically is China's largest enemy. In the past 160 some years, Russia has annexed China's territory. Some say 1.5 million square kilometers. Some say up to 4.5 million square kilometers. So the largest enemy is not U.S., but rather Russia. That's a popular view. This is not a really official view. But the official view under Xi Jinping is that U.S. is the enemy and Russia is a potential ally. So I think they are choosing wrong ally and wrong enemy by playing the wrong game. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Gokhale?
Yeah, thanks, Pramit. My sense is that if we accept the underlying analysis that the Chinese are looking at America as the existential threat, then I foresee this competition growing sharply in this decade. Now, that doesn't mean a confrontation, but what it means is a cycle of tension followed by relaxation and followed again by tension, as China attempts to make up the deficiencies in order to take on the United States in the coming decades subsequently. And those deficiencies are essentially twofold. One is technological. We have seen the manner in which the semiconductor industry is still controlled by the West, and it can starve China of critical semiconductor chips. The second is the dollar. The Chinese are determined to break American dollar hegemony, and this will be their objective this time in the next 10 years. Now, in this, although they may feign indifference about India, my sense is India is very critical to the Chinese game plan for 2 reasons. One, because for the first time in 250 years, you have 3 significant powers on the Eurasian mainland again: Russia, China, and India. And 2 of them are certainly rising, and the third, while declining, may take quite a while to decline. Secondly, the Indian Ocean region returns to the central geo-economic relevance that it had before the 18th century. In both the Eurasian mainland and in the Indo-Pacific, India is a fulcrum state. It is a key state. And therefore, at least the Chinese objective will be to ensure neutrality, and if not, friendship. Now, in the pursuit of that neutrality, what we might expect is a combination of persuasive tactics and low-level coercion, because they believe that India does not have the capacity for geopolitical backlash. But my submission is, if you look at the manner in which we have acted on the line of actual control after 2020, as well as today's news of the role we have played in Vienna in ensuring that the Chinese resolution against AUKUS has not succeeded in the International Atomic Energy Agency's General Assembly, I would suggest that the Chinese need to revisit their theory that India is not capable of a geopolitical backlash. So the short point is, in the next 10 years, the Sino-US relationship will dominate all other relationships in the world. And I do not believe that India is so insignificant as not to figure in Chinese calculations on this matter.
Thank you. Venkatraman?
Yeah. So I just tackle, this question, whether there is a consensus between what they are doing with their military and their geopolitical, ambitions, policy. I think in the recent past, especially that has got exacerbated after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there seems to be a certain kind of major difference within the party as regards how basically China deals with US. So therefore, there is a certain section of the leadership which feels that as China is about to claim its rightful place under the sun, and as it is about to graduate to a better position in the international system, somehow a section of leadership feels that Xi Jinping has been not very right in his strategic calls of openly supporting Putin. And so there are reports which said that there was a meeting between Yang Jiechi and the American counterpart, and after that meeting, one of the Russian hands, and who is very close to Xi Jinping, has been now demoted. He was widely tipped to be the next foreign minister. That's something which we have to consider. There are certain section of leadership which also feels even before the Russian war, has Xi Jinping, in the name of wolf warrior, has gone for a very confrontational kind of an approach with the United States, and in the process has postponed the China rise story. Has something gone wrong there? So there seems to be a growing voice that we need to get American, our engagement with the United States back on track, which actually has gone sour in the recent past. Now, as well as does India matter? I think, of course, it matters, because superficially, whatever the Chinese say, that actually India does matter. Why it matters? Because if we leave the liberal economic order as established by the US-led West, I think there are two dominant models which the world at large are providing as to how do we develop politically, economically, and as a society. And India and China, if I can use the word, both are civilizational states. We have a very long history. And China has adopted an authoritarian approach, and in 1949, and China has also got a society comprising of 56 ethnic nationalities, of which the Han nationality is 92%. So largely the society there is homogeneous. Whereas India is such a heterogeneous society. We have democracy, functioning democracy, and with still we have been able to achieve many milestones. So therefore, India's model of development is also a very persuasive case. So therefore, this is also a certain kind of a competition between what are two different models of a society to develop. Are we slow? Yes, but we are steady. Is China fast? Everyone says that, wow, speed is the IP of China. That's what they say, the real IP, intellectual property. But is that speed going to undo it in the near future? We don't know. No one has got the right answers. One thing is for sure, that India is going for, whether India is going to forward or not, India is definitely not going to backward. So we are slow, but we are sure. Is that something of a narrative that we can view around China? We don't know. So therefore, I think, yes, India matters, but India should actually try to, understand that we negotiate from a position of strength and not from weakness. So there's strength begets strength. So therefore, it is up to us now. How do we, make ourselves strong so that we negotiate ourselves better? The onus is also on us to make China a bit uncomfortable. We are already doing it, as Mr. Gokhale has said. But I think we need to graduate beyond these things. Every time we are, in other words, economically, we need to basically become very strong. And that is going to give us, very critical bargaining chips to play our cards to the best of our national interests. Yeah, that's it.
And now turn to Javed. Go ahead.
All right. So my colleagues have talked about how India matters to China. Let me add just one more point to that. The Chinese have studied Indian politics and Indian society very closely. I mean, they have actually the kind of resources that they devote to the academic study and research of India and South Asia are several orders of magnitude greater than the kind of resources that we in India devote to the study of China. So that's one. The Chinese Communist Party has sent its representatives, its delegations to India to study, to deal with the Congress Party, to deal with the BJP, to study how these political parties function. And not just in India, but also all around our neighborhood, right? They have these MOUs with political parties all around South Asia. So of course it matters, because they are trying to figure out how can the Communist Party itself sustain itself in power by learning from other examples. Second, India also matters to the rest of the world. Forget the Chinese, because who else has the kind of experience dealing with the People's Republic of China as India does? So the rest of the world ignores Indian lessons of dealing and of experience of dealing with China at its own peril. There's a certain value to an Indian perspective on China, the size, the scale, the aspirations of the two peoples. So there's a way that Indians will be able to understand China that is quite different and unique from how other countries or scholars from other parts of the world will be able to understand China. Right now, Indian troops are confronting Chinese troops, right? I mean, if the rest of the world is agreed that China can be a military threat, who else to learn from on how to deal with China but from India? What are the lessons for Taiwan in dealing with China that it can pick up from how the Indians have dealt with the Chinese on the line of actual control? So I think this is something that needs to be underlined, that India matters, but how India fits in, how India will matter also depends a great deal on how, the kind of resources we devote to the study of China. And this is where perhaps meetings such as those that Founding Fuel have conducted here, and perhaps the several entrepreneurs in the meeting might think of ways to support China studies in India. And let me stop with one thing, which is that while we pay attention to China, it'll also be a bit of a tragedy if we let China suck all the oxygen out of the room. India also needs to pay attention to other parts of the globe, to Africa, to Latin America, because that's how we are going to be number one eventually. We can't just be selective and only choose to pay attention to the problems that are immediate and pressing. We also need to be able to anticipate strategic challenges. Thank you.
You heard that?
Yeah, Pramit, just to add one liner to what Jevin has said, it has been very frequently said, know your friends well, know your adversaries better.
So anyway, so everybody's heard that. Please sponsor a chair for Professor Jacob. He'd be very happy. I believe that you have inspired more questions from the audience. So Indrajit is not letting us off that quickly. So Indrajit, go ahead.
Yeah, so there are a whole bunch of questions, and I'll again try and cluster it so that we don't completely overshoot the time. We'll probably, if it's okay with the panel, take another 5 minutes more and try and wrap up and have some quick responses, because there were lots of questions on the internal contradictions, whether it's about the government and its actions against entrepreneurs and high-tech entrepreneurs disappearing, whether it's about the wider society and whether that society really, common people have a voice in the decision-making process, and how that's going to manifest itself. There are some questions, and I'm not reading them out to save time, but broadly, how does one look at this ideological, if at all, contradictions that are coming up? We discussed it right at the beginning, but a little more perspective on that would be wonderful to have, in short, of course, given the limited time, and then I'll propose the vote of thanks.
What I'll do is I'll limit that question to
Yeah.
Professor Bo and Mr. Gokhale. Contradictions, of course, is something Mao himself wrote a famous essay on. But I'll go ahead. The internal contradictions of the Chinese Communist Party's policies on the economy, Professor Bo.
Okay, we all know, this is a little joke. I think we all know India is democracy, is largest democracy in the world, but China is a real democracy, because according to Xi Jinping, India has democracy where leaders can be have to be elected, but in China, they have called the whole process democracy. There's only one candidate. You have two choices. One, to support the candidate. Second option is to go to jail. That's the participation of the, I think one guy who is actually close friend of Vice President Wang Qishan, who just said something kind of insulting remarks about Xi Jinping. He was sent to jail for 18 years. So that's called whole process democracy in China.
So there's no contradiction here. It's very straightforward. Mr. Gokhale.
I think factional politics has always been a part of the Communist Party since 1921. And no leader, not even Mao Zedong, was able to completely prevail over that. So although we seem to think that Xi Jinping is unchallenged, I'm inclined to agree with Professor Po that there are subterranean currents which run against him. The question is to what extent those currents will run in the opposite direction and when will they surface. And therefore, our presumption that an authoritarian leader may continue to rule in perpetuity, or that there is no other corrective measure within the system is incorrect.
Since we still have a few minutes, would either Jabin or Venkatraman like to address this? Because it's still an issue that the party allowed the rise of Tencent, Alibaba, of Jack Ma, of this huge explosion. I mean, China literally led the world in a lot of the digital revolution, the revolutionary economic policies that, for example, India is now adopting. And now they've at least suppressed those companies, though a lot of that digital element seems to digital economy, or that capacity now being absorbed more into the surveillance system of the state structure. Would either of you like to make a comment on that?
Thanks. So Chairman Mao once spoke about two types of contradictions. One are antagonistic contradictions and another non-antagonistic contradictions. I think of late, the antagonistic contradictions have become, more sharp. So the Chinese system, the state-owned enterprises have had the wherewithal to excel in manufacturing industry, but they did not have enough of an expertise in a domain like the tech domain. So therefore, the times necessitated that private players are promoted by the state. Now, once, they have reached a certain point where, they have got more than adequate anchorage from these private players, the leadership has come to know, Xi Jinping, that we cannot afford to have a China whereby Alibaba and WeChat has more data than the party state itself. That is extremely dangerous. That is at the level of, surveillance. Second is, you also cannot have, individuals who start challenging the general secretary of the party himself. And third, as there seems to be increasing, complexities in socio-economic modernization, the youth of the country, as they say in China, the youth in China today is completely, lying low. They have what they call the 9-9-7. So 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. working 7 days a week. So when you are having a problem of demography and, the youth, the dependent population is more, the youth of the country is preferring to opt out of the rat race and go to the countryside and lying low, then you have a major problem as far as, legitimacy to the party itself is concerned at the social level. So therefore, at multiple levels, the state has basically decided that, we can't afford to go beyond this. And that is why, so that is one. And another is, unlike in the West, the online platforms in China are not considered to be, high-tech industries as such. So therefore, the Chinese state now is trying to, downsize or cut to size, if I can say so, many of these tech giants, and it wants to basically prop up smaller players through what is known as the government guidance funds, whereby the private funds will come, in the form of venture capital funds. But when it comes to supervising and, channeling these funds in the strategic direction, it is the state that will decide. And so these are some of the ways in which the party is trying to tackle, new tech-driven China. And on one hand, it wants to assert control, and on the other hand, it also has certain kind of compulsions to ensure that, the legitimacy, no kind of legitimacy crisis comes in. And the party continues to have a semblance of trust when it comes to common mandate. So this is how, they are currently tackling these contradictions. It's a very complex question. I'm not very sure whether I've been able to, make sense.
Yeah, but I think I'll just close now before I hand over to Indrajit for the final things, and emphasize Mr. Gokhale's new book, After Tiananmen. And one of the key points that he does make in this book, and I'll stress this, is how much Xi Jinping looked at the collapse of the Soviet Union and saw what he felt was the weaknesses carried out by the Soviet Communist Party in opening up, in allowing a degree of dissent under Gorbachev and so on, and then eventually resulting in the collapse of the regime, and how much, a lot, not all of what Xi is doing is about making sure that never happens in China. And one of the key lesson he learns from this, from the Soviet collapse, is the party must go back to its original communist roots, not just as in terms of ideology, but in terms of control. So Indrajit.
Thank you so much, Pramit. That was a lovely close. I'd like to personally kind of, on behalf of Founding Fuel, thank each of our panelists, Mr. Gokhale, Professor Bo, Venkat and Jabin, really for a very, very fascinating and stimulating conversation. This is really exactly what we were hoping for, and I think we've kind of certainly surpassed expectations. It's been a terrific conversation, but we're not going to end it there. What we're trying to do to help our audience today process what they've heard, we've invited 4 people from our community who are kind of part of this conversation to really share their takeaways after this masterclass is over. They will record 4 audiograms, 2 minutes each. And the question we've asked them is, what did you learn from this masterclass that was new and different? One thing that you learned. And we've invited 4 people. 3 of them are stalwarts, and 1 is a voice of a new next gen, if I may call it that. So very kindly, all 4 of them have accepted our invitation. That's Sandeep Vaslekar, who's the president of Strategic Foresight, a leading think tank, and he advises governments around the world. He's very kindly agreed to share his takeaways. To David Judson. David Judson used to be the editor-in-chief of the Hurriyat Daily News and the editor-in-chief of Stratfor, which is a global intelligence company, and a very senior journalist as well. Vivek Kelkar, our dear friend based in Bombay, who's the editor and CEO of the Cosmopolitan Globalist, which is a platform that all of you ought to be familiar with. They do some amazing work on geopolitics and international affairs. He's going to be one of the three. And finally, Varshita Agarwal, who's an analyst with JP Morgan Chase and a student of, I think, Venkat at IIM Indore, who's also agreed to share her perspective. 2 minutes, short pieces. It's largely to ensure that the audience has some more food for thought. And on the 5th of, that's Monday, we will, at 5 o'clock, share with you 3 things. You will get these 4 audiograms, you will get the link to this recording, and you will get a wonderfully curated 5-minute summary of this conversation, which my colleague Shweta Basrao will put together. And when you read it, you'll see how skillfully she's able to distill and capture the essence of what this conversation is. All the essential reason for that is that it must give us more time to ponder and think and reflect. Without that, these conversations don't really carry value because we just kind of forget, right? So that's in a nutshell what we're hoping to do. We'd love to hear the feedback from today's audience as well. So before you leave, if you could share in one word that describes your masterclass experience today, do share that on the chat. It'll give us some perspective of how it's landed. I know there were many other questions that came up which we couldn't directly address, but I think in the run-up to the Congress, we will certainly have an opportunity to pick it up. And thank you, Pramit, as well, for brilliantly anchoring this conversation. And hopefully in the next couple of weeks and after, we will have a chance to pick up some of the key issues that emerged from the Congress and try and see if there is a way to make sense. And we'll find another mechanism to do that, maybe through a podcast or a Twitter Spaces conversation. But we like to keep at it. And to Jabin's point, I think there is definitely a need to look beyond China as well to the rest of the world. And we'll keep that certainly in mind. But on that note, I'd like to again thank the panel for sharing their time and their perspective. It was brilliant listening in, and for the audience to join on a Saturday morning on an important day. Today is one of the first days of the Durga Puja as well. So thank you so much, and wish you really all the best, season's greetings, and have a great weekend.